Welcome to the Psychology Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk Podcast is a unique conversation with experts in the field of mental health from around the globe. Topics include hypnosis and mind-body treatments, ethics and cultural diversity, psychotherapy and psychiatry, emerging treatment modalities, and much, much more. While you're listening, please give us a like and subscribe to the show. It helps us to continue to provide excellent programming. And now, here is the episode. Hello and welcome. Our guest on this episode is Dr. Karyne Messina. Dr. Messina has been on this podcast 2 or 3 times before, and she's welcome back, of course, because she's such a great conversationalist, as I'm sure you will glean from our dialogue today. Dr. Messina is a psychologist and child, adolescent, and adult psychoanalyst, in addition to maintaining a full-time private practice in Chevy Chase, Maryland. She is on the medical staff of Suburban Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, which is part of Johns Hopkins Medicine. She is a podcast host for New Books Network and chair of the Department of Psychoanalytic Education Scholarship and Writing Section, which is part of the American Psychoanalytic Association. Today, she will be speaking about her new book, The Power of Community, a 45-day plan to stop Trump from turning our democracy into his autocracy. Dr. Messina, welcome back.
Thank you, Scott. That was a lovely introduction, which I really appreciate.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Well, this is a pretty loaded topic. Some people might be tuning out right now just because it's politics. Some people might be tuning in right now because they agree, excuse me, with your premise. And some people might be cursing us right now.
Yes.
We can't be everything to all people, as you certainly know as an analyst and a psychologist and a counselor. And I certainly know these things too. But is there a way for us to open up this dialogue, talk about the topic, and mostly talk about the love of the democratic process and principles which is embedded in this book?
Well, I think we can do that. I'll tell you why I wrote it. I'm worried about democracy. I think democracy is in trouble. I've never been, I'm an optimist. I've never been a pessimist about it before. But after reading all 900 pages of Project 2025, I realized that if the Republicans win this time, it seems to me we're in a fair amount of trouble. Trump has distanced himself from this work of art, quote unquote, but all of the people, or many of the people who are in his administration and who he has tapped to go back, they wrote it, along with the Heritage Foundation. So that, in addition to the 180-day playbook, it's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the scariest things in it, perhaps, is the fact that it would be a shutdown of the government if everything was privatized, or if everything was just, executive office committed positions that are in line with this document. You'd have to fire people and replace them, and would you replace them with competent people? So there's the whole structural aspect of how things run in government. And then there's also the whole, just the gist behind it, which is non-pluralistic, not open to other cultural or religious backgrounds. And that's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's very scary. And again, that was one of the reasons I wrote the book, because the Democratic Party, they want to change government radically without Democrats having one thing to say about it. So that's not a democratic process at all. Obviously.
Right. So it goes again. So it's an autocratic kind of document for a person who projects autocracy and wants to be somebody like Putin or someone else, right? Big leader, Modi, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't jibe with democracy.
Not a bit.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the perspective of the book. It's called The Power of Community. What is that power?
Well, I came about this concept. It was called something else at one time. Actually, I decided if I'm going to talk about Trump and Vance and the Republicans, I need to know what they're saying. So on scheduled time, I watched at least one rally in I believe it was Nevada, and I watched part of another one. And the power of community is, generally speaking, a good thing because it fosters belonging and validation, and it's crucial to who we are as human beings. But I saw it used in a different way, which I thought was, well, it was intriguing for one thing. There were people um, of all races, all age groups were represented, women, men, old, young. I think there were even some children there. Not that the children because they were taken, but I was really just taken by the fact that there were so many people from what appear to be different walks of life who attended this rally, and they seemed to just latch onto his every word, whether it was making sense. And some people are saying that he's been rattled by the Harris nomination, so he's sometimes speaking not so coherently. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter what he was saying at these two rallies I attended. So that was a different kind of. It was a different way to look at the power of community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It was almost like a hypnotic state that these people were in. I'm not saying it was that, but it was almost like that. It definitely had a feeling of what I know about cults. It felt like a cult leader could be talking to his people.
Okay. Okay. And so uh, you had this observation, and is Trump's party now the party of a cult? Is it a cult rather than an actual political party with platforms working towards democratic process in a democratic country?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Um, Stephen Hassan, Hassan, I believe is the correct spelling, wrote a book about this is a couple of years ago, and I think it's called The Cult of Trump. And many of the things that he talked about seemed really familiar, and
Mm-hmm.
things that we know that we've read about, like Jim Jones. Of course, it's not exactly the same. I mean, there's no Kool-Aid involved, but just going along with everything the person says, it just had that feel to me. So that was also pretty worrisome. It was also interesting, as you know, Scott. One of my big things in life is trying to talk about and help people learn about projective identification, which, simply put, is just projecting aspects of one's own character onto other people and then attributing those characteristics to the other people.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a little bit different. It seemed like he was projecting, this was my hypothesis, but he was projecting his own desires for power, success, and dominance onto his supporters. So, and then they were identifying with that in themselves. So, this sense of power, they felt more powerful because they were there, or more successful because they were there, or more maybe like part of the dominant party because they were there. So it's sort of a loop. He projected this, it seemed to me, and they took it in and identified with it and identified with him, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with his enemies, I think he does something similar, but a little bit different in that his negative traits are projected onto the people he doesn't like: his weakness, corruption, incompetence, etc.,
Mhm.
onto people in other parties, we'll say, and then those people are attributed with having those characteristics. But the followers are also, they're picking up on that and believing these people are actually inferior. So it's a little bit of a different twist on
Okay.
projective.
So let's step back a little bit here. In some respects, you're just talking about a political rally where people are very excited about the ideas being espoused. So, when you were describing it, what went through my mind was having watched a little bit of the Republican and a lot more of the Democratic, because I tend to lean that way. But the Democrats put on a great show. The Democrats put on a better show than the Oscars has had for a long time. Not that I disagree with their ideas, or not that I think that they don't have a platform of some sort and discuss the ideas behind it, but I think the difference is that there's a focus on an autocrat in the Republican Party now, rather than a platform and people working together to come up with ideas. So I think there's an inclusiveness. Of course, it's an agenda-driven inclusiveness, right? Where that's kind of where the Democrats are these days, and have been probably at least since the, I don't know, 40s, 50s, 60s of the last uh, century. But there's a lot of there were a lot of expectations, raising hope, getting people excited to go out and vote, canvass. The difference, I think the difference you're pointing out is that with Trump, it's all about me, 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 do whatever I say, get in line.
That's the way it felt to me when I watched these rallies.
Okay.
Didn't
Okay.
seem to matter what he was saying. It was just that he was speaking seemed to me to be the major attraction.
Okay. So stepping back a little bit from this is the problem. I mean, and you've written several books about autocratic leaders and projective identification in the past, and you've co-authored books with people, and we've talked about them before. People can certainly look and see some of the other conversations we've had on this podcast and find your books. But this is kind of a curative. It's kind of a curative to the issue that's arising here in the States. Um, I know that in the book you quote Jamie Raskin. Um, what was that interview about, and how urgent are politicians feeling, at least in D.C., perhaps out in the rest of the country, about the rise of autocracy around the globe and at home?
Well, I did an interview with Jamie Raskin,
Mhm.
uh, 2022, and it could have been yesterday. I mean, the topics were so on target with what we're talking about right now, and what the Democrats are talking about. And it's preserving democracy and how important it is to do that, and how people really need to get involved. It's not something we could take for granted anymore, if we ever did. I mean, and people, I think, thought, oh yeah, America is a democratic country. Of course, it always will be, but maybe not. If the Republicans win, maybe that won't be the case. So each person, each person has a voice, and people have asked me, well, how can one voice really make a difference? But one voice really can. One voice can gather people together. It could be in their backyard. It could be for a barbecue. It can be in a town meeting, and they could start talking about their perspectives. One person can write things on social media. One person can try to get something published as an opinion piece and newspapers. And if you can't do that, anybody can write something on Medium. I guess it's just medium.com. And I've read a lot of very good things on Medium. I don't know if you have, but it's good. And you don't have to get anybody's. I mean, there may be some criteria for appropriate language, but people can write articles on Medium, and they don't have to be accepted by any kind of judging system.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So these 45 days, why 45 days?
Well, I was going to do 60 days, but I was also aware of the publishing process. So it had more to do with timing and getting the word out about the book. And I thought, well, 45 days would be mid-September, so we're just about there. I think there are a few more days than that, but if people started now, started on the 15th of September.
Okay. And then just really got worked up. What about like let's to look at two worst case and best case scenarios for what we're talking about here. Worst case scenario would be that Trump wins. What do you do then?
This fight needs to continue,
Mm-hmm.
because we'll say 48%. Somebody is predicting. People are predicting all kinds of things. When we were just talking, you mentioned that person who's predicted or had the right prediction in the
Oh,
last.
Alan Lichtman. Yeah, he's got those 13 keys to the White House, to the presidency. Yeah, yeah. He's currently as we record this on the 6th, he's gunning for Harris and Walz. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's yet to be proven wrong, according to him. And well, looks like he has very good retest reliability for his predictors. But what were you saying about that?
Well, I hope he's right.
Oh, yeah.
Nate Silver, who I think he has a newsletter now, but he used to have a website, 538.
Mm-hmm.
Just recently, as recently as this morning, thinks that Trump has a very good chance of winning. And as of last week, he was saying 52% of a chance. And the reason for that is not because of the popular vote, but it would be a replay in a sense of 2016. Hillary Clinton, I believe, won by nearly 3 million votes, and yet Donald Trump had 77 more votes from the Electoral College.
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, the popular vote, it's great, but it's not what changes the game.
Correct. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's disheartening. Um, what Nate Silver says, I would concur that Lichtman would say he doesn't really know anything. He's a nice guy, and the polls really don't say anything. But Lichtman also called it for Gore in 2000, which was thrown by the Supreme Court. The democratic process was not allowed to be properly executed in Florida, and so Gore was out of there. But
yeah,
not to be a doomsayer. If he wins, you have to keep the fight going. Do these ideas, are they still applicable?
right.
Yeah. Okay, they're applicable. Okay. Best case scenario, Trump loses. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz go into the White House. What then? What do you do after that?
You still have, we'll call it 48% of the American public wanted Trump, who have some of his ideas still in mind. So I believe this is not just, I think, I don't know about evergreen, but I think some of these ideas are important until the future. And when is the future? When democracy will feel really solid again? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Well,
Any thoughts? Any thoughts about that?
I don't know. It seems to me that there needs to be it's a monolithic structure that maybe has outgrown the structure of the Constitution. Maybe there needs to be more things like term limits for the Supreme Court, term limits for Congress and Senate. I mean, these roles were set in place. The Constitution was written when people probably lived to be 45, 50 if they were lucky, not 80, 90 years old, where you had to beg, borrow, and steal them off of the Supreme Court or out of their position. I mean, we've seen people diminish in their cognitive faculties and continue to keep their position in the Senate and Congress. We that there needs to be a term limit or an age limit for things. Definitely term limits. I think that there needs to be more clarity with regards to campaign financing, because the campaigns are all funded now by anybody who has the biggest dollars, and that could be somebody from California in the tech industry. It could be somebody from old money in the East Coast, or you name it. It could be corporate money going to fund politicians. And that's not democratic. If your laws are being passed primarily for 2% rather than the other 98% of us, it's not, trickle down economics will not continue to sustain a democracy. I think that there needs to be more attention paid to growing the middle class, having people feel safe that they can actually pay their rents, pay their bills, pay their mortgage, grow a family. I think that is one of the issues that Trump has been able to latch onto, even though he's part of that 1 or 2% that benefits from lowering taxes on the rich, lowering taxes on corporations. There's a lot to be done. I think it's just outgrown itself. What do you think?
I absolutely agree with that. I think a lot of things need to be changed. I mean, for example, the Supreme Court. Trump has already changed the balance there from 6-3. So just about anything, I feel like he sends to the Supreme Court. I mean, I think we know what will happen.
Yeah.
Also,
well, go ahead.
no, he also, there's a building block here. He also appointed 54 federal appellate judges in 4 years. That matched Obama's 55 appointees in 8 years. So it sort of stacked the deck. He also appointed a smaller number of racial and ethnic judges. Mm-hmm. Compared to any recent president in either party. So
yeah, well, one of the things I think, if my observation is correct, a lot of the judges he's appointed have not sided with him blindly, but believe in the Constitution. So that's a positive thing. They have some kind of democratic and constitutional sense to them. I don't think that just because he appointed them that they're just going to be bowing down to an autocrat, in other words. Well,
I would agree with you at the lower level. If push comes to shove at the Supreme Court level, I'm not so sure.
Well, it's atrocious what's going on there. It's pretty blatant.
Yeah.
But in a way, Trump and this whole, this has been going on, I think, since Obama was elected. I think that there was a galvanizing of initially racism, right, which people kind of hid behind. Oh, we're Tea Party movement. This person's not real. Blah blah blah. He's not a citizen. The whole the birther movement,
right?
Which Trump latched down to. This is, in a way, this is solidified in Trump's rise to power, but also they're galvanizing the left, and I think people who believe in democracy, like the Lincoln Project, for instance, Republicans who have gone against the party and against basically because it's been taken over by an autocrat. So in a way, don't you think that this has galvanized the need to fix these things, the urge to fix it?
I do think so. I believe Kamala Harris has said she's going to address the issue of the electoral college situation because I mean, what are you going to do? Somebody can have 10 million more popular votes, but if they get more electoral college votes, it just doesn't matter. So there's something that might have worked for the founding fathers, but it doesn't work anymore. In terms
Correct.
of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Constitution, I was reminded of something, and I'm not sure how many people are really aware of this, but there is a clause in there that says that we don't need to, I'm paraphrasing, but we don't expect that these laws, regulations will always be applicable, so that there is room to change what we're saying now. Of course, these are my words, but I thought, well, why haven't people really honed in on that? Because the founding fathers weren't saying this is it. We're setting this up, and that's what we're supposed to do. Now, of course, we have amendments, and I guess that's where it can be done, but sometimes that's a little difficult, or
That's
probably.
extremely difficult. Yeah, for sure. Look at what happened to the ERA.
Yeah.
So, uh, um, yeah, I think that it's a pretty bleak picture out there. You're not painting it; you're just describing what's going on. Maybe we can kind of move back to psychoanalytic ideas and the idea of projective identification, and describe that a little bit more as to how that plays into. I think in general that can play into politics. It can be something a politician can have in their back pocket to get people worked up, but uh, it can also just be a personal issue that someone has. And how do you think that plays out with Trump?
Well, I think there are two things. Projective identification, proper, so to speak, is a defense mechanism. And by definition, defense mechanisms are unconscious.
Right.
So, because of the way we develop, we have defense mechanisms. Now, everybody has them. One defense mechanism that people have is denial. If something is too painful, people just shove it away, but they're not saying to themselves, "Oh, this is too difficult. Let me just put that someplace else. I'm not going to deal with that now." Now, people do that, but that's not really denial. There's somebody that I have read lately, and his name is Philippe Copeland. He's a professor at Boston University, and he talks about strategic denial, and that's when it's more done with purpose. For example, in terms of racism, if somebody says, "Oh, this isn't a racist country anymore," "Oh, yeah, it used to be bad, but it's not bad anymore," or if they kind of minimize in any way, that's done with intention. People aren't just unconsciously doing that, and this is in addition to the regular unconscious processes that happen with all of us. If somebody's close family member is killed in some very atrocious way, people often just put it in the back of their minds, but not intentionally. It's just a difficult thing to focus on and deal with.
Yeah,
So,
and that might account for people having lost time or memories from childhood, right? If something terrible happens to them, it doesn't compute with, it doesn't fit into the rest of the narrative of their lives.
no, and that's often a traumatic experience, and
Hmm.
it's caused by that. With regard to Trump, I think there are two things that happen. I think that he is engaged in this process of projective identification where he projects things he doesn't like about himself onto others and then points his finger and says things like, "No, no, no, not me, it's you." I did write a book one time with that title.
Yeah.
It's you. Um, But I think he also does something else, which is blame shifting, and that is conscious. And I think he does know that he, at times, blames other people for things that he probably has some awareness of.
Right.
I do want to say a little bit about my saying these things. I have not examined Trump. I certainly have read a lot, and I've written books. Um, there is a slight difference in what psychiatrists can say and what psychoanalysts can say. And this is one difference. There's something called the Goldwater Rule.
Right, right, right.
According to the Goldwater Rule, psychiatrists cannot say too much about somebody unless they've personally examined them. Whereas psychoanalysts are encouraged to warn the public.
Hmm.
So
Where does that come from? Where does that encouragement stem from?
where does what stem from?
Where does that encouragement stem from? Is that part of an ethics or
Just part of
rule?
that.
Okay, okay,
It's just an obligation to warn people about things.
okay. Interesting.
To be cautious. Obviously, you just don't say things that you just make up, but if you observe things over
right. Well, yeah. Hopefully you don't do that. That would be unethical. But for sure, yeah. So the duty to warn, is that like Tarasov duty to warn, or is that, which is a case where, or is it duty warn that's more global for somebody who might be a threat to society?
Yeah, I think it's similar, but that was between individuals. And
Correct. Yeah. So, okay. Well, it probably sounds like psychiatrists can't. The Goldwater applies to psychiatrists, but it doesn't apply to counselors, social workers, or psychologists. And specifically, psychoanalysts, if you're part of the organization, you're kind of duty bound to point that out.
right.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. There was a book that came out in, I'll say 2018, where I believe this number may not be right, but I believe it was 38 mental health professionals read this book about the threat that Trump poses. And there were issues with the psychiatrists who said things because of the Goldwater Rule, whereas
Gotcha.
not much for the other mental health professionals.
Well, can you talk a little bit about the structure of the book? It's 45 days, 45 small chapters.
Sure. So I think of this, and this is in my mind. So I say to myself, try to remember RAS. So the book is structured in this way. So there's a task for every day. And by the way, doing 45 things, 45 of these tasks, might be pretty tedious to do something every single day.
Mm-hmm.
If you can weave it in with the work you're doing already, maybe not. But if people do 5 of them, 10 of them, it can go a long way. So the R part is reflect. As psychologists or dynamically oriented psychologists and psychoanalysts, we know that one thing that we want people to do is reflect on something. Think about it. Not just go off and do something without giving it a lot of thought. So everything starts with not a reflection, but the idea of reflecting on something that you might want to do or that I'm talking about. And then if it makes sense, to take some action. For example, in one of the days, there are things about Project 2025. Now, that's hard for somebody to read the whole thing. I don't know how many Americans are actually going to read that. And I have another point I want to bring up about additional writing that I'm doing about that, but I'll come back to that. But anyway, one of the things is to just say read parts of it. And then maybe to write down your take on a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Say, we'll just take, for example, the Department of Education. Donald Trump wants to do away with that, according to many sources. And it's stated in Project 2025 that his people put together. So, okay, so what kind of action might you take about that? Well, you might want to write down your thoughts first. Like, okay, you've thought about it. Now write down what it would be like if the Department of Education was eliminated. Well, who would be regulating education, public education? Anyone? Well, perhaps states, but then you get into a lot of tricky business because states have a lot of different ideas about how children should be educated and, for example, censorship, what they should be reading. So if your child is in New York State, and these are only examples, they might be encouraged to read one thing, whereas if they're in a southern state, that may be on the list that is no longer acceptable. So writing about the action would be, in this case, writing would be something one might do. And then the S part is sharing. Okay, well, what can I do? I've encouraged people to write their thoughts down and then share their ideas with a group, maybe a neighborhood group. Maybe it's a friend group. It might be just one friend, but one friend can share with another friend and the group can grow. So one idea would be to meet once a week, if that's too much, every other week, to talk about some of the ideas in the book, and then how a person can put them into action or how a group could do that.
Okay. So it's not really the structure of the book isn't like stepped where you're building on people's knowledge base or insights. It's more just people could like open up to day 28 and do day 28, or they could do day, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Or they could repeat those days if they particularly want to read about Project 2025, read the whole thing. They could take a couple months and read the whole thing. No, but seriously, it's basically you could kind of open it up to any random page and think about the thoughts in it and take the action and share.
Absolutely. And the other thing I wanted to add about Project 2025 is that I'm writing a weekly LinkedIn article or blog on my LinkedIn page so that people can find out about it, more about it. So I'm writing something every week. Also, when people, if they finish the book or at the end, there's a website they can go to for more things to do, different things to do.
Okay. One of the questions that people might have is like, how does psychology fit into the political sphere? Like should they be separate things, or should they be like actively, should psychologists, should counselors, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists actively be pushing for, systemic changes? I would argue yes, because the systems are going to do a lot more to inform people's mental health than not, and understanding how those systems impact, like racism impacts people's mental health, poverty impacts, wealth impacts people's mental health. A lot of people don't realize that wealthy people have a lot of problems. Sometimes more than others. It does not fix everything. And I do believe that politicians will utilize tactics of psychology like strategic denial or of blame shifting. Educating people about them I think would help people to be better informed and make better informed decisions about politicians, and maybe focus more back on policy rather than any cult of personality. But is this a good thing? Do you think we should be, hitching the political wagon to our horse, so to speak?
I think it depends on the person.
Okay.
if you know the person's ideology or their political stance, then I think it's useful to help them tease out why it's important to them. I actually do have Republican patients, and I don't push my book on them because that's not their belief system. And if they believe Donald Trump is the right person to lead the country, that's what they believe. What I can do is help them think it through. And it's the same is true with Kamala Harris. Help them think through why she's the best candidate without me saying, well, you should read my book. It's
okay.
99
Well,
cents.
yeah, correct.
Kindle.
Yeah.
It is true. It's 99 cents on Kindle because I want people to have access to it. But that's not why they should read it. They should read it if it aligns with their personal philosophy in life.
Okay, let's say Kamala Harris wins. Would you rewrite the book? Like if we go, let's put it this way. It's not about one party winning. It's about democracy winning, right? Democracy winning and stays stable, can stabilize. How would you rewrite this book? Would you rewrite it? Would you rewrite it and make it be more like 60 days to helping to bolster democracy or something like that?
Well, in one, we often have working titles of books. So in an earlier rendition of the title for this, I had so many. Did have 60 days, and then I had or however long it takes to anchor our democracy more solidly, or something like that. There were too many words to it. I don't think it ends on election day, no matter who wins, because approximately half, we'll just say for the sake of discussion, approximately half of the country believes the other person should have won. So that means half of the people either don't like all of the democratic ideas, or conversely, half don't like the idea that Trump has suggested and which are suggested in Project 2025 and the playbook. And that is not a democratic viewpoint. So we still have half the population. So if I were to rewrite it, I might rewrite it with a different title, like however long it takes to get back our democracy, or to anchor it, solidify it, or something. But fundamentally,
Okay. So I mean, it would be great if that happens, and you could flush it out and make it more for just how to, how to be a good citizen, like ways to empower yourself and feel like you're connected and helping the democratic process around. You did mention that, I mean, this Project 2025, if it hadn't have been pointed out a couple months ago, most people wouldn't have known about it. And I suspect most people who are registered Republicans or independents don't even know about it. The ones who want to vote for Trump probably are voting for Trump because he's kind of like an Archie Bunker with, a lot more money in the bank, and they find him entertaining, or they just like him, right? He just seems like the person they'd say hi to on the street every day or something, in some way, shape, or form. So maybe not everybody realizes what is up with this document, and they're not voting for the document. They're not voting to have a monarchy with a church behind it,
I think that's a good point. I also think that Trump has done something rather unique, and that is that he has made people feel like they're just like he is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that couldn't be farther from the truth. I heard some woman one time in an interview, a reporter was asking her what she liked about Donald Trump, and she said, "He's just like I am. He's like we are. My community, he's just like us." Well, I thought to myself, really? How could that be? Now, I do realize that people believe that because of the perception he's putting out there, but people who are similar usually share similar ideas. They visit each other. They could go to the other person's house. They might go to picnics together, camping trips, vacations. And if you think about it, is Donald Trump really going to allow somebody to come to Mar-a-Lago and knock on the gate?
Well, no, he's pushed people away. He's had to push people away. Good point. Very good point. I think that I'm reminded of Hillary's catchphrase, "basket of deplorables." I'm sure that Trump thinks most of the people who would vote for him are deplorables.
Right. Yeah, she got in big trouble for saying that. But yeah, I believe he probably does think that.
I think he's very stuck up. I really do. He thinks a whole lot of himself. But all right. We probably should wrap up here. The book is The Power of Community, a 45-day plan to stop Trump from turning our democracy into his autocracy. Soon to be annotated as something that is more about just bolstering democracy in general, we hope. Do you have any thoughts before we sign off here, Dr. Messina?
Oh, it's just that if people do want more information about Project 2025, they can look for my LinkedIn article. And it's just, I think it's just Dr. Karyne Messina, just clicking onto LinkedIn and going there.
Okay, excellent. And if you can send it to me, I'll try to put it in the show notes.
Okay, great.
Okay, yes. Excellent. Well, thank you so much again for chatting with us.
Thank you so much. It was a very interesting conversation, as they always are, Scott. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Did you know the Psychology Talk podcast is all over the World Wide Web? Well, not entirely all over, but we are in social media and we do have a website. Pop over to www.psych-talk.com to find out more about the show. All material is copyright the Psychology Talk podcast. Opinions of our guests are not necessarily those of the host or the show. Material is provided for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.